Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Indie Reads Aloud. Today we have returning author Michael Samerdyke. He's going to be reading for us again. I think, Michael, this is like your fourth time on the program?
It's the fifth, yeah, fourth, yeah.
Fourth, yeah, you are super prolific. I'm really enjoying all your storytelling. It's really nice that you keep coming back again and again.
Mm-hmm.
Michael
Happy to be here.
Samerdyke was born in Cleveland, Ohio. He is a graduate of the Odyssey Writers Workshop and has won the Lonesome Pine Short Story Contest twice for Snowman and The Rest of the Way Home, and the Appalachian Heritage Writers Symposium contest for the Frankenstein Doll, which you can hear on another one of our episodes. He currently lives and writes in southwestern Virginia. I'm so glad you came back.
Happy to be here.
It's good to have friendly faces in the room again.
Oh, yeah.
Today you're going to be reading from a superhero science fiction novel called The Adventures of Captain Starburst, right?
Right.
So tell us a little bit about this story, rather than me just reading the boring show notes that anybody can read. Why don't you give us a little bit of the synopsis for this book?
Okay, this one takes place in the 1970s, okay, so there's no cell phones or anything like that, okay, and the main character is a high school student named Gerstenfelder. One night he sees this mysterious object in the sky and he touches a fragment that falls from it, and that gives him invulnerability, okay, so he can be hit and not hurt, all right. So he realizes this is a superpower, and being a reader of comic books, decides, well, I got to name myself and stuff. So he becomes Captain Starburst.
Okay.
He can name himself, but he's making a costume is sort of beyond him. So he has sort of a drab costume and everything. Also, he can't drive. He doesn't have his driver's license yet. So that cripples him there a little bit too socially. But anyways, when what I'm going to read today takes place, he is attending Verona High School. Verona is the town where he goes to high school. He's a junior in high school. He has a crush on a classmate named Larissa Matkoff, who may or may not be interested in him. Greg has a lot of hopes, but whether they're grounded in reality or not, we'll see.
Right.
And we'll also see today what happens when he meets somebody that he used to know and has gone to a different high school.
Awesome.
And so the chapter of the book that I'll read today is called Kiss of Panthera.
Okay, before you get into the reading, we just want to give everybody a little bit of a listener advisory. Some of the content in today's reading might be of a mature nature, so young children in the room, parents want to preview this before you let your youngsters listen. Michael, if you will, please take the microphone and read aloud.
Okay. Kiss of Panthera. You never mention English class anymore, Mom said. How do you like Mr. Witt? I had just put some asparagus in my mouth. I chewed and thought about how to answer the question. He's fine, I said after I swallowed. I like English class. Well, you never talk about English class like you did last year when you had that woman for your teacher, Miss Holbrook. You always talked about English class and what your teacher said last year. Mom looked at me. Don't you like Mr. Witt? He seemed nice enough when I talked to him at the Meet the Teacher night. Mr. Witt is fine, I said. You had a crush on that teacher of yours last year, didn't you, Mom said. Miss Brooks? That was the radio show, Grandpa said. He said it was Miss Holbrook. Well, you need men for your teachers in high school, Mom said. And forget about Miss Horton. Women mature earlier than men, so older women and younger men never work out. It's unnatural. The woman always takes advantage of the younger man. He took a sip of coffee. Those kind of matches are just unnatural. I get the idea, I said. I shifted my gym bag from my left hand to my right as I walked along Dragoon Road. It would be great if I could fly, I thought for maybe the millionth time. It would cut out the boredom of walking along Dragoon Road every damn school day. Still, I told myself I was blessed enough. My strength had improved, and it wasn't like I was shifting the bag from my left to my right because my left arm was tired. If anything, my left leg was tired of being bumped by my gym bag filled with books. I spread the joy around a little, I thought. I looked at the front stairs of the house I was walking past. They put out a bale of hay topped by some pumpkins to remind people that Halloween was this month. I shrugged. We hardly got any trick-or-treaters at my house. It was the last one on the street, and most kids didn't think it was worth the walk. Since I didn't get in a costume anymore, Halloween seemed like a largely pointless holiday now. Maybe I should use Halloween as an excuse to make a deluxe Captain Starburst costume. It wouldn't attract attention at this time of year. Who was that old Polish lady Mom had taken me to so she could hem up my good pants? Mrs. Kwiatkowski? A car's horn tooted behind me. I turned my head and a girl in a black Mustang II waved at me and smiled. I smiled and waved back, not having any idea who the heck she was, only that she wasn't a student at Verona. Probably thought I was somebody else. Mustang II drove past me and put on its signal before turning into the empty tennis court parking lot. I watched as the car made a U-turn and pulled back up to the mouth of the parking lot, like it was waiting for me. Probably wants directions, I thought. She's definitely not from Verona. As I walked over to the parking lot, the girl rolled down the window of the Mustang. She took a drag on her cigarette and blew smoke out the window. Hi, Greg. I blinked. It was Nancy Fayos. Her brown hair was cut short, like Dorothy Hamill, and her face seemed a bit sharper than I remembered it. It was Nancy, all right. Hey, how are you doing? I looked at the Mustang too. Great car. It's my mom's, she said. She took another puff on her cigarette. Still haven't escaped from Stalag Verona yet. Oh, you know what they say. There's never been a successful escape from Luftstalag Verona except for yours. She laughed. I gotta say, I said as I looked at the car. This is what you get for escaping. I need to start tunneling harder. I shook my head. So how's life in Miller Hills? Her lips puckered and she took another drag on her cigarette. Like life in Verona, they obsess about beating Cato instead of beating Bradstreet. But like they say on TV, only the names have been changed to protect the innocent. Sorry, I cleared my throat. I wish you were still in Verona. Nancy shrugged. Maybe I do too. She looked out the windshield. My parents broke up this summer. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Hey, do you want me to drop you at your house? She asked. Sure. I hurried around the front of the car while she took a last puff and threw the cigarette out onto the pavement. Then she pulled out onto Dragoon. Verona's been in the news a lot lately, Nancy said. Did you see any of that weird stuff that's been happening? Not really, I said. I looked out my passenger window. I did see when that guy distracted the cops with his motorcycle while the goalpost blew up at the football field, but that was about it. Well, that's too bad, Nancy said. I mean, a comic book fan like you must be kicking yourself for missing out on all the action. Oh, I don't really read comic books anymore, I said, turning back to her. They changed them earlier this year, and I just don't like the new guys much. She looked at me and I met her gray eyes. That's too bad, she said, and I got the feeling that she was looking for something in my expression. I was kind of hoping you were still an expert on superheroes. Well, I didn't forget everything, I said. What did you want to know? She looked out the windshield and pointed to the stoplight. Do I turn left here? Yes, I said. So what did you want to ask me? She shrugged and waited for a chance to turn. Anything, like if you had ideas about superheroes, given all the stuff that's been going on. I tried to chuckle. The superhero in Verona, he'd die of boredom. Well, weird stuff's been happening in Miller Hills too, she said. She turned on to Otis and then gave me another look. I wondered if you'd heard anything about it in Verona. I didn't have to lie this time. No, nothing at all. She sighed and looked away. Well, it's like Jaws, I guess. They don't want to give people the facts so they don't panic. Facts about what? I asked. Where do I turn? Nancy asked. Left at the stop sign, I said. Facts about what? Nancy didn't say anything. She turned left at the stop sign. Last house on the left, I said. Facts about what? I never saw that movie, she said as she pulled into the driveway. Last house on the left. I heard it's pretty scary, though. I haven't seen it either, I said. Nancy put the car in park and looked at me, her face pretty serious again. I don't think I could be scared by a movie anymore, she said. What the hell was going on here? I didn't think we were talking about horror movies now, but I didn't want to tell her that I was Captain Starburst either. I looked at those gray eyes and tried to think of something to say. I don't think I could be scared by a movie anymore either, I finally said. I nodded. I've seen a lot in these past few months. Since that thing flew overhead in the spring, she asked really fast, like it was the reason she'd been driving through Verona looking for me. That's right, I said. Nancy reached in her purse, peeled the wrapper off a stick of paper wrapper off a stick of gum, and wrote something on its back. Here's my phone number, she said as she pressed the paper into my hands. I've got to go and pick up my mom from the lawyers, but call me after 8 o'clock tonight. Yeah, okay, I said. Put her hand over mine and squeezed. Thanks, Greg, she said. Got out of the car and watched her drive away. This had to be the most fantastic, unbelievable thing that had ever happened to me, even topping the fight with the blaster. I stood in the living room doorway and looked at my mom, who was looking at the TV. I got to call somebody at 8 o'clock, I said. Who? She asked, her eyes still fixed on emergency. Was honesty really the best policy? If it was, I'd have told her I was Captain Starburst long ago. Ted Gurecki, I said. He's in my biology class, and Mr. Brainerd told me I should let him know what he missed today. Well, if he missed today, he should find out for himself what he missed, Mom said. She looked at me. Don't you get in between him and Mr. Brainerd. You'll get in trouble that way. Ted's a good guy, I said. Geez, I was telling one lie after another now. I just need to tell him about the birds we talked about today. It's no big deal. Well, if it's no big deal, why can't it wait until Ted comes back to school? It can't wait because Mr. Brainerd told me to call Ted and tell him about the birds we talked about today. The Happy Days theme song began playing on the TV. Mom looked at the set again, and I walked into the hallway to the telephone. So Mom was in the living room watching the tube, and Grandpa was in bed. Maybe he was asleep, but I realized that this was not the best place for me to have a serious conversation with Nancy, especially if Mom thought I was calling Ted Gurecki. Why the hell had I thought of him? I hated that creep for brainwashing Larissa. I picked up the black receiver and jammed my index finger into the hole on the dial as if it were Ted Gurecki's eye. Rissy. How I hated that name. I began dialing Nancy's number. Here I was, I thought, dialing Nancy, thinking about Larissa, hoping to God that Mom didn't hear what I was going to say. What superpower could help me now? The phone rang 3 times before someone picked it up. I swallowed. Hello, Nancy said. Hi, I said. I tried to think of what I could say next. I tried to whisper. I'm not really in a good place where I can talk, I said. Okay, she said. Neither am I. Not really. I gripped the receiver and tried to think where this conversation could possibly go. You did see that thing in the sky that night, right, Greg? She asked. Mom laughed at something on the TV. I took a deep breath and squared my shoulders. Yes, I said. I touched part of it too. Nancy gasped, and I felt glad, like I'd passed some kind of a test or something, or I'd at least shown her that Greg Gerstenfelder could take a risk. We have to meet, she said, tonight. Is Hayes Creek Park still deserted? See you at the gazebo there at midnight. I hadn't been back to Hayes Creek Park since the night of the owls. The world had moved on since then, what with the blaster and Malvolio. In fact, no one talked about the missing Bradstreet youths anymore. Everyone assumed they'd been killed in a drug deal, and who cared about that once the blaster tore the heart out of the Finneytown shopping center? A silvery half moon hung in the night sky as I approached the gazebo. Well, it was that funny, old-fashioned looking building near the pond in the middle of the park. I assumed it had to be the gazebo. I carried my helmet under my arm. I wanted Nancy to see it when I told her about my powers, but I figured if I showed up wearing it, I would look hostile, like I was trying to hide something from her. Heck, I thought as I looked around at the trees and their shadows cast by the moonlight, this place was probably scary enough for Nancy. She didn't need to show up and be confronted by a tall guy in a metal helmet. I thought about the afternoon. Nancy had really changed. She hadn't smoked in 9th grade, and she certainly hadn't known how to drive then either. Back then, the idea that she would meet a guy in Hayes Creek Park at midnight seemed as far-fetched as, well, the idea of me turning invulnerable. She must have gotten the power too, I thought. Maybe something like invisibility. But if she did, how would I know if she was here? Thought about that and looked around. Maybe Nancy was already here, and I just couldn't see her. Nancy? Greg! This figure burst from across the trees along the moonlit field. For a moment, I thought it was one of the owlers, and I crouched and made my right hand into a fist. Here I come, Greg. It was Nancy. I blinked and lowered my guard. She leaped, or it leaped. I put out my arms and caught her. Caught it. I blinked at the fur-covered face that grinned at me. I knew those gray eyes from this afternoon. This was indeed Nancy in my arms. Her face seemed broader, her eyebrows darker and bushy. Fine golden fur covered her skin, and when she smiled, I could see her fangs. Laughed at my amazement. Isn't this wonderful? She raised both her arms in the air like she was a cheerleader. I let her down. She stepped away from me and turned around in a circle, stopping with a big wicked smile on her face. Then she put her hand on her chest. Meet Panthera, she said. Evildoers beware. She bared her long teeth. What the hell? I asked. She took my right hand in both of hers and looked into my eyes. What do you turn into? She asked. I don't turn into anything, I said. Nancy, or Panthera, blinked and looked sorry for me. I hurried over to the bench where I'd set the helmet down. I picked it up and slid it over my head. I call myself Captain Starburst, I said. I touched this piece of armor that night, and I think I have its properties. I've been hit several times, even by that blaster guy, but I haven't been hurt. Nancy didn't say anything for me. That's your costume? She finally asked. Well, yeah, I said. She took a step back. Well, it looks like you work at a gas station. Well, that was my idea, I said. I mean, I want to fit in with the crowd, until I have to fight. I don't drive. If I walked around in some green and yellow outfit, people would see me and maybe call the bad guys and tell them I was on my way. I really needed to have some stars sewn on this thing, I thought. I didn't like the way she was looking at me, like I needed to be pitied or something. Nancy, or Panthera, shrugged. Well, I don't have to worry about that, she said. She laughed. I move fast and I stick to the night hours. Have you had any fights, I asked. I stopped this creep who was robbing kids by Lover's Lane, she said. They really have one of those in Miller Hills, I asked. Nancy sighed. Greg, they have one in Verona too, if you ever tried to find out. He held up her right hand and let me see her claws. Long and nasty they were too. I took down 3 guys who were stealing cars. She smiled and I could see her fangs. They were really happy to see the cops. That's good, I said. Panthera looked at me and laughed. Then she did a backflip and spun around on her right foot. I had never seen her so happy. It's the best thing that ever happened, Greg. Don't you see it? Well, tell me about it, I asked her. I can see your Panthera, but why? How? She waved her hand like swatting a fly. Well, why are you invulnerable? How did you get something by touching a piece of metal? You know? Well, no. So how am I supposed to know? She shrugged. She paused like there was something she didn't want to say. You were at Lover's Lane, I asked. I was taking a walk, she said sharply, by myself. She inhaled deeply, thinking about my folks and how things had turned to crap for all of us when I saw this light in the sky. She laughed softly, and I thought things were going to be different. Well, I did too. And I had to see where it came down, she said, those gray eyes of hers looking at me. I started to follow it, and then I saw this little bit of light break loose and come down, like a golden teardrop. She raised her furry hand as if waiting for that teardrop to fall on me. I knew it was mine, she said. I know it doesn't make any sense, but I knew it was falling because I was there, and I grabbed it before it hit the ground. It was like a gem, a yellow and orange stone. Did you change when you touched it, I asked? She shook her head. I took it home and had the weirdest dreams, like I was being burned alive like a witch or something, and running through a forest, and sitting in a cave with all these women when this blood started dripping on us. By now she had closed her eyes and was rocking from side to side very slightly. Then I got up and I put the stone against my heart, she said, and I could feel it flow into me. She opened her eyes and looked at me. Does that sound crazy to you? I looked at Nancy with her fur-covered arms and face. Ordinarily, a stone flowing into a person would sound crazy, but here, under this moon, standing next to Panthera, not in the least, I said. Reached up and stroked the side of my helmet. It's great, she said. I can be Panthera whenever I want. I don't care what those bitches at MHHS say about me anymore, and I do good for the community. Stepped away from me and did another backflip. Life couldn't be better. I nodded. Well, if you put it like that, Greg, we ought to fight crime together, like in those comic books. That would be fun, I said. Great, she shook her head. But you really need to do something about your costume. You have a great power, and you want to look like a guy who pumps gas? I was going to say that they didn't really pump gas anymore when she leaped at me and I caught her. It'll be great, Greg, she said. See you this weekend. I'll call, okay? She rubbed the top of my helmet, then twisted out of my arms and bounded away into the dark woods. Really great, I said to the darkness. I willed myself to keep my eyes open as Johnny Tremaine and the Sons of Liberty marched across the movie screen. I hadn't slept since getting back from meeting Nancy, or Panthera, or whichever one she was now. I hadn't dreamed about being burned at the stake or standing in a cave with blood-stained women, however. I had dreamed about the Yowlers. They had touched stuff from the sky, and they had changed into creatures and then disintegrated. I had seen that. Nancy hadn't disintegrated, but here she was, having the time of her life because she touched a rock from outer space and then turned into a panther woman. This could not end well. I rested my eyelids and thought for a moment. That thing that had flown over Verona and cast off the junk that had created me and the Yowlers had continued west toward Miller Hills, where it had dropped whatever made Nancy into Panthera. That thing would have come to Earth somewhere, I thought, and where it did might have some answers to what happened to me and Nancy. If Nancy wanted to get in touch with me this weekend, maybe I could suggest a trip west to try to find something more connected to the events of that night. Something poked me in the shoulder and I opened my eyes. I glanced over my shoulder at Larissa Matkoff. She tipped her head back to where Miss Drummond sat. Thanks, I said softly. I turned back to the movie screen. That was nice. Larissa could have let me fall asleep and Mrs. Drummond would have gotten really mad and I'd be in trouble. But instead she poked me and I woke up before there was a problem. That was nice of her, I thought. She didn't have to do that. She could have let me get in trouble for sleeping in class. What did that mean? Maybe Ted Gurecki didn't have Larissa sewn up in his clutches after all. Maybe there was still a chance that Larissa would go out with me sometime. After all, not turning into some panther woman is a definite positive quality in a date. There's a good movie on TV tonight, Grandpa said as he set the post-TV schedule down on the table next to his easy chair. Really, I asked? This was a red-letter day. Usually Grandpa did nothing but curse and dismiss the stuff on TV from when he got up to when he went to bed. Late tonight, he said, 11:30 on Channel 6. My eyebrows went up. That was the Big Stan and Little Frank show. They showed horror movies and did a lot of dumb stuff in between. Well, what is it? I asked. Grandpa stretched out his bad leg and winced. I got to get to bed soon, he said. Bring the wheelchair over. Sure, I said as I got up and went to get the chair out of his bedroom. What's the movie? I asked when I came back pushing the chair. Cat People, he said. He smiled. Your Uncle Ed wanted to see it, so I took him downtown to see it back during the war. He shook his head. I don't think Ed liked it all that much, but it had this lovely French girl in it. She was this woman who turned into a panther. Mom walked into the room and frowned when she saw that Grandpa was still up. Come on, Dad, she said. You should be farther along by now. I was telling Greg about a movie he might like, Grandpa said. Cat People, about this woman who turns into a panther. Garbage, Mom said. The things people throw their money away. Well, how did it go? I asked Grandpa as I took him under the arms to stand him up. With this panther woman, did she have a boyfriend? Grandpa stood up with my help, and then I turned him and he sat down in the wheelchair. He frowned, got his breath, and then he shook his head. It had to end badly for them, he said. It was a movie, you know? He laughed. Still, she was lovely. How could she be lovely if she turned into a panther, Mom said. It's showing movies like that on TV. That's why kids are all on dope today. It's a good movie, Greg, Grandpa said as I began wheeling him back to the bedroom. You should watch it. Mom shook her head at me. Wasted time, she said. Just a waste of time, watching a movie about something that couldn't happen. When are you going to drive? Nancy asked. We were in a gremlin, headed west. I had walked over to the Verona Library, and Nancy had picked me up there. I had explained my idea about the westward flying space thing, and she agreed that it sounded like a good idea, if I paid for the gas. Nancy took another drag on her cigarette and looked at me. Mom says I can learn to drive when I turn 18. It'll save lots of money on insurance, I said. I shrugged. Well, how are you going to get a decent job if you don't drive? Nancy asked. I don't know, I said. I don't think Mom really wants me to drive. She wants me to come home and take care of Grandpa. That was Nancy's turn to shrug. Moms could be weird, I thought. Nancy's mom seemed to regard to the end of her marriage by not giving a crap what Nancy did. My mom had responded to the end of her marriage by doing her best to make sure nothing ever happened to me. There might be a third mom out there that did things on a happy medium, but I doubted I'd run into her or her offspring. Nancy crushed out her cigarette. You ever see a doctor? I asked her. I'm not worried about smoking, she said with a wave of her hand. I frowned. I meant about becoming Panthera. She laughed. Like I'm going to tell Dr. Nussbaum my secret identity. I didn't mean he wouldn't believe me, Nancy said, riding over what I was trying to say. And if I transformed in front of him, he'd have a heart attack and die. She took a deep breath. He's a sweet old man, and I don't want to do that to him. Great. He looked at me and smiled. You, however, could be in for quite a show when, really? I thought of Nancy without her clothes. That would be nice, seeing her naked. It'd be great to put my arms around her and kiss her. Then I realized she probably meant me watching her turn into Panthera. Oh, I said and shook my head. He rode in silence for a moment. Do they talk much about the Bradstreet 3 out there in Miller Hills? I finally asked. Nancy shook her head and pointed. I'm going to go west on Morrow into Westerfeld, she said. That's pretty much the way that thing was going when I saw it that night. Those 3 kids from Bradstreet High who, it's some kind of drug deal, Nancy said. Joyce in my homeroom, her father's a cop. She's stoned half the time, but she says it wasn't a drug deal, I said. I saw them die. I took a deep breath while Nancy looked at me. They disintegrated. I saw it all. Nancy stared at me. I glanced through the windshield and saw that the light had turned red ahead of us. Stop the car. She slammed on the brakes in time. My hands left 2 imprints on the dashboard. There's a McDonald's over there, I said. Pull into the parking lot. I'll tell you everything. After the light turned green, she drove into the McDonald's, pulled into a spot on the far side of the lot, and lit her cigarette. There were 3 guys from Bradstreet High, I said. They were jerks. I was walking to Hayes Creek that night. They threw a milkshake at me as they drove by. I got to the park. I found that piece of metal and touched it. Closed my eyes and rubbed my forehead like that would bring back more memories. I don't know what they touched. Honestly, Nancy, if I did know, I'd tell you. But they attacked me. And when they did, they weren't human anymore. They couldn't speak, they could only yowl. They looked like some type of gorilla, green gorillas, and they all attacked me. That's when I learned that I couldn't be hurt. I opened my eyes and looked into hers. They disintegrated. Whatever they touched, it was too much for them, or it made them too unstable or something, because their bodies tried to change back, and then they all just disintegrated, turned into dust. Nancy turned away from me, threw the car door open, got out and slammed it behind her. I scrambled to get out of the passenger door and I hurried around the back of the gremlin to get where she stood. She was trembling. I put my hand on her shoulder. It's not the same thing, she said. I didn't transform right away. I can control when I change. She shook her head. It's not the same thing, not at all. No, I said. I didn't know what to say. I just know what I saw. And you aren't like them, Nancy, not at all. But I've got it under control, she said. A tear ran down her cheek. Things are fine. I like being Panthera. And I like being Captain Starburst, I said. She laughed and threw her cigarette to the asphalt. That's a really stupid name for a guy who dresses like a grease monkey. I gave her a hug. I know, I said. It's a real stupid name. You think that thing fell in Lake Erie? I asked. I mean, if this is the direction the thing was flying, the only logical place for it to end up was in the lake. Nancy looked at the setting sun. Well, we probably ought to turn around and get you back to Verona, she said. Besides, cats don't like water. I laughed and she smiled. We were driving past a state park, and the shadows from the tall evergreen stretched across the road. If this were a movie, it was just a place for a werewolf to stagger out between the trees and attack us. Although I realized the closest thing to a werewolf was driving this car. I looked at Nancy, who paid me no mind as she was looking for a place to turn around. God, it was good to be in touch with Nancy again. It was great being able to talk to somebody about that night in Hayes Creek Park. I just didn't think this would end well. Hey, Nancy pointed in front of me. Up the road from us, on the right, sat a big dark green tent. It was big like a circus tent, only it looked like it belonged to the army or something like that. That has to be where it came down, Nancy said. And it looks like someone else has found it and is maybe excavating the area. Nancy pulled the gremlin over to the side of the road and stopped. Okay, I'm not in favor of walking in there and talking to them, I said. If anybody knows about what happened to the Bradstreet tree, I'm sure I'll be looking at jail time or maybe time on somebody's dissection table. You're invulnerable, Nancy said. How could they dissect you? She drummed her fingers on the steering wheel. Me, on the other hand, they could dissect. Look, I said, we've got to drive by. Even if they have a totally bogus sign in front, like Great Lakes Turtle Study Expedition. Turtle Study, Nancy asked. It'll give us something to investigate. And then we'll find out who's really behind the tent and if we can trust them. Nancy pulled the gremlin back onto the road. We'll go in there, but we'll be just two stupid teenagers, she said. That's what they'll think we are anyway. And if they try to get cute, Panthera and Captain Fantastic will take them down. Starburst, I said. Captain Starburst. She shook her head. We drove up to the tent. A large white sign was lashed to the side of the canvas. Ross University, Wetlands Lab number 337. My mom wants me to go to Ross, I said. Mine too, Nancy said. That gives us an in. Fords were parked on the road up ahead, so Nancy pulled in behind them and we got out and began walking back to the tent. While Lake Erie itself was pretty close, I didn't think I would call this spot a wetland exactly. Hold my hand, Nancy said. We've got to look stupid, remember? Well, how Archie and Veronica can you get, I asked, but I gripped her right hand. You actually read that junk, she asked. Hell no. There was no opening on the side of the tent that faced the road, of course, and there was none on the side facing us. So we walked parallel to the tent to see if we could get in at the back. What are you kids doing here? Two thick-set guys, who looked like the closest they got to Ross University was the seat of a lawnmower, stood in front of the opening of the tent. This isn't open to the public, one of them said. He snapped his fingers and pointed. Go home. Hey, is everybody at Ross University so friendly, I asked. We're both planning to go to Ross when we graduate. I squeezed Nancy's hand and smiled at her. I thought she was going to barf. I looked at the Tweedledee brothers again. We thought someone here could tell us about the wetlands research Ross does. I'm crazy about turtles and ducks and stuff. No can do, one of the guys shook his head. Nobody not associated with the university is allowed in the tent. But next year we'll be students at Ross, Nancy said. She looked very meek and sweet. Can't we have a look? Beat it, the guy said, who wouldn't understand any of it. You don't have to be insulting, I said. I'll write to the Wetlands Project at Ross and let them know that you insulted my girlfriend. Doc will back us up, the guy said and laughed. You get out of here. I looked at Nancy. Should she turn into Panthera while I punched the hell out of these guys? We could, but what if they were just jerks doing their job and I left them with a set of broken arms? Then what? I shook my head. Nancy nodded at me, and we turned and walked back to the Gremlin without a word. I don't like beating up regular people, I said once I closed the door. I thought it was something like that, she said. Well, like you said, we have something to investigate now. The way that guy referred to Doc made me think that they really worked for Ross. Wetlands Lab number 337, Nancy said as we drove past. I think Miss Constanza, the biology teacher at my school, is from Ross. I'll ask her what she knows. Nancy pulled into the convenience store parking lot at the corner of Otis and Dragoon. It was already twilight, and I knew I was late and Mom would be mad when I got home. Thanks for the afternoon, I said to Nancy. I'll look into that Ross University stuff, she said. I'll let you know what I find out. Great, I opened the car door. It's like we're partners in solving this, she said. Huh? You know, Panthera and Captain Fantastic team up to fight the bad guys. Captain Starburst and the Brown Dirt Cowboy, you mean, I said. Nancy blew a raspberry at me, and I leaned over and kissed her. Thanks for driving, I told her. She raised her eyebrows and grinned at me. Now I'll have to let you see me change into Panthera sometime, she said. You don't have to worry about paying me for the gas. I'm home, I said as I let myself in the back door. Sorry I'm late, but I fell asleep at the library. I was worried sick about you, Mom said after I entered the kitchen. You should have called to let me know what was going on. I'm sorry, I was asleep. How could I call when I was asleep? Mom tried to come up with a refutation of that, but couldn't. Well, some girl called for you, she said at last. My jaw nearly hit the floor. What? I asked. Some girl from one of your classes called for you. Well, who was she? Rissy something? I never heard of a name like that before. Is she foreign? Larissa? I blinked. Larissa Matkoff had called me? Well, she speaks very good English for someone who's foreign, Mom said. Larissa was born here, Mom, I said. I shook my head to get back on topic. What did she say? Why'd you call? Oh, she had a question about American history, Mom said. That's why I thought she was foreign, that and her name. Anyway, she said to forget it. She was going to call Ellen and find out what she wanted to know. Did you get her phone number? Why should I get her phone number? She was going to call Ellen. There was no need for you to call her at all. So Larissa had called me, and I was out looking at some tent in the woods on the other side of the county with a werepanther. My life hadn't been this complicated a year ago, maybe not even a week ago. Have you been smoking, Mom asked? You smell like an ashtray.
Thank you very much. This is a fun little story that plays with some of those cultural norms that we've all grown up with. Superheroes, real people changing into superheroes or having super abilities or supernatural abilities. What was your favorite part about writing this story?
Well, I got into it because like I read comic books at this time, like the late 1970s, basically when the book is. And so this was a way of, well, okay, so if that stuff had been real, how would that have played out in the situation in which I lived, growing up, in the Midwest, typically superhero books always like take place in New York or someplace that's like New York,
right.
That, so it's like, okay, let's try to fit it into a Midwestern thing. And
so how much of you is in this story?
Some definitely,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it is closer to me than a lot of the other stuff that
Fun. What a great way to show people another side of your personality.
I hope so, yeah.
I think that's fun. Thank you so much for coming back on the program again. We really enjoy having you here.
I enjoy reading.
Have a wonderful night.
Okay, you too. Take care.